Hi friends, I'm Sarah Jo Strawberry, and today we're going on quite the journey, so strap in, because we're talking again about Professor Sharp. I did not expect to do another Sharp video so soon. I have a few other videos in the works, some half-edited, and I discovered what I'm going to be talking about here and just had to immediately push the rest of that aside and jump on this, because I'm so excited about it. This is actually my second time recording this video because while I was editing my first attempt at this video, I discovered so much more, and honestly this is a reason why I should always take notes for these types of videos, because I was so excited I didn't even take notes, I just leapt right into it, and had I taken notes, done like an extra step of research, I could have just done this all at once, but that's fine. Anyway.
That's why you always leave a note.
Also, considering this video will make it so that almost half of my videos on this channel are about Professor Sharp, I think my whole thing that I've said a few times now about this not being a Sharp-specific channel is just going out the window, because there's just so much to discuss about this one character. To start all of this, I was taking capture of the game for a different video I was doing and decided I wanted to get new footage of going up the staircase into the hidden room in Professor Sharp's chambers, because my original footage was cut off weird and sped up and I couldn't find the original file prior to making those edits. So I wanted a new video of that, and I was reminded of a comment left by Anna. Hi Anna, if you're watching, on my first video, my Professor Sharp deep dive, where she mentioned a theory she'd seen about Professor Sharp possibly being an artist based on the contents of that hidden room. And I've brought this hidden room up before, mainly to show why Professor Sharp's chambers are so much taller than the others, because that hidden room gives his chambers overall more height. And I'd never given much of a second glance to that room, and I actually realized why on my first couple playthroughs I would have disregarded this room, because I did my first complete playthroughs on the Nintendo Switch, and the Switch port of Hogwarts Legacy has so much missing, seemingly arbitrary, as when I showed it to my husband he said the same thing. For example, there is a artwork hanging up in Professor Sharp's bedroom above the couch that is different in the Switch version, but that same painting is present elsewhere. For whatever reason, they decided to switch out that painting there. Also, this actually made me feel a lot better, because I mentioned in that deep dive that I had missed Professor Sharp's cane and wheelchair that are in his bedroom on my first couple go-arounds of the game. And the reason I missed it is because they're not there. I didn't see those until playing the PlayStation 5 version, because they are not in the Switch version. And there's some stuff missing from this hidden room in the Switch version that is in the PS5, and I'm assuming other versions of the game. So from what I had seen in the room, mainly the sketches around the room, I thought these were blueprints of Hogwarts, and this space had long been abandoned. As you go up the stairs, there is a wrapped-up statue on one landing and a wrapped-up armchair, items that are preserved, and when you go into the room itself, there's straw all over the floor, so it did, upon first glance, seem like an abandoned space. However, I have now realized I was very wrong about that, and I believe this room is being actively used by Professor Sharp, and the items in this room are meant to tell us a little bit more about his backstory and just in general who he is. There are also mannequins found in this space that are the same ones you fight in the Haunted Hogsmeade quest, and you also find these mannequins randomly in other parts of the game. In Glad Rags, it's not that random, in Professor Fig's classroom, in Professor Ronan's office, among other locations. So again, I thought they were simply randomly placed here, as they are in many other locations in the game, but again, it seems they have a purpose. Before we really get into this, I should talk about the hidden symbolism in Hogwarts Legacy, especially as it pertains to professors and adults in general in the game. In the book, The Art and Making of Hogwarts Legacy, we see that there is intentional symbolism connected to the different professors that the game makers included. An example from page 99 of the book is a quote from Kevin Keel, senior artist of environments, who says, "Our divination professor is from Uganda, so we worked to reflect her background and personality into the decor of the divination classroom." This intentional symbolism extends beyond the classrooms and into the professors' personal spaces, namely their living quarters. On page 113, in the section Their Own Room, it says, "Classrooms in Hogwarts have always been a reflection of the personalities of the professor who teaches the subject. Whenever possible, story prompts were used to personalize the classrooms, and especially the professor's personal space. Some characters went through so many drafts, it was safest to stay generic in the art, adding just a few key objects to support their individualities later in production." There is also a quote from Boston Madison, the Hogwarts art lead and senior artist of environments. "The artists enjoyed adding little details here and there for the keen observer to help each professor at Hogwarts feel like a fully developed person."
Observant.
So I guess to begin, we'll talk about what in the room leads me to believe it is being actively used. The primary being, when you enter this space, there are several lights on. In other storage rooms in the game, there are either no lights, some light coming through a window, or maybe one or two torches here and there throwing off some light. But there are a considerable amount of lamps in this room, fully casting it in light. Now, why does this hidden room lead us to believe that Professor Sharp is an artist? Well, again, he is the only one who would be able to use it, and this room is full of artwork. When you first pass through the fireplace, there is a wall mural of a sphinx, a clever nod to the riddle of the sphinx as you were solving the riddle of the fireplace. And as you make your way upstairs, right outside the room, on the wall there are paintings of a hippogriff and some sort of bird. I believe this is a pigeon personally, but I'm not entirely sure. And in the room itself, there is another hippogriff on the wall, as well as an owl. Around the room itself, there are 13 different sketches of 10 different locations and items at Hogwarts, namely the boathouse, castle gates, Great Hall entrance, the Great Hall outer wall, the greenhouses, the headmaster's office, the clock tower, the owlry, the sorting hat, and the south wing bridge entrance. There's also a workbench on the far side of the room with tools for sculpting as well as woodworking. On the table in the center of the room is a box of vials that I initially thought were potion ingredients, but upon looking around the game more, I can't find another box of potion ingredients that looks like this, even though we see several carrying cases of vials in locations throughout the game. This one appears to be unique to this room, and perhaps instead of potion ingredients, they are paints. On the table as well, there are small pots that contain what appear to be the handles of paintbrushes. And again, these small pots with possibly paintbrushes are elsewhere in the room. There are also 2 portable paint palettes on opposing sides of the room, and on the shelves there are rolled up parchment that, again, I initially thought might be blueprints, but I now think are blank parchment for more drawings. In one of the cubby holes on the shelves, there is also a stamp to make a wax seal for sending a letter. There are tea tins on the shelves that perhaps contain the wax needed to make the seal, or maybe even charcoal, and this makes a bit of sense if you think about the fact that Storing crafting materials in tins is kind of a universally human thing. It crosses cultures. For example, incredibly universal, again, across cultures. Everyone will know there's either cookies in here or sewing supplies. So it would make sense for wizards to perhaps pick up on the muggle habit of storing these things in tins. The most interesting art-related thing in this room is that there are two ceramic busts on top of one of the shelves in the room. They depict a man and a woman, both with their eyes closed. The man looks a bit like Professor Sharp, but without the scarring and a crisper collar, a buzz cut, and slightly different facial hair. The woman has dark hair that is pulled into a bun, as you can see from a design indicating some sort of updo on the back of her head. I believe these busts are representative of people Sharp knows. I don't believe the man is supposed to be depicting Sharp himself, even perhaps when he was younger, because the young character models of Professor Sharp that were revealed by GrandTheftDiamonds, talk about that in my deep dive, as well as my 9 reasons Sharp was meant to play a bigger role in Hogwarts Legacy videos. We see from those models that he has always had this sort of long hair, so I don't think this man with a buzz cut is him, but I think the similarities between this man and Sharp, as well as the woman's dark hair and Sharp's dark hair, are intentional, and that these busts are meant to represent his parents. I also believe the reason their eyes are closed is meant to be symbolic of the fact that they are dead. I just want to add real quick one more thing I found while editing that points to these individuals being deceased, which are these rings of flowers I found at the bottom of the busts. They look a bit like memorial wreaths that you might see at a funeral, and they also look a bit like poppies, which in many cultures for many centuries have been representative of death and memorializing a loved one, as well as, again, sleep and eternal sleep. And if this means that they are deceased, perhaps these busts are showing them at the age they were at their death, and they appear to be rather young, which would mean their son was also rather young when they passed. In my other Sharp videos, I talked about how there's a theory with the young Sharp character models in the game files that there was meant to be a pensive memory that showed us why Professor Sharp became an Auror. And maybe that pensive memory would have shown the death of his parents. Based on their approximate presumed age, he would have been around the age of those character models. So it's not unreasonable to think this is giving us a little taste of what we would have seen in that pensive memory, if that pensive memory was a thing. The subjects of the art in this room would depict Professor Sharp's immediate surroundings. We see there are constantly hippogriffs flying in and out of the Forbidden Forest, and that is a kind of recent phenomenon at the school, so that explains the hippogriffs on the wall, perhaps. And the ceramic busts possibly being his parents, that would be another fond memory from his youth. The sorting hat being sorted into Slytherin. The boathouse appears to be from the perspective of sitting on one of the boats arriving to Hogwarts as a first year. So again, perhaps these are some warm memories he's capturing along with his immediate surroundings. And the final thing to talk about in this space are suspended from the ceiling, these Da Vinci's flying machine-esque contraptions. Ornithopter. It's called an ornithopter. You know this. One appears to be depicting a magic carpet. I think there are 2 of those. And other winged machines, which brings me to a new inspiration theory, which, if you've seen my Professor Sharp deep dive, I talk throughout the video about these inspiration theories of characters and figures that I believe inspired Professor Sharp, or inspired the game developers, the story writers, when creating the character of Professor Sharp. This new inspiration theory is Leonardo da Vinci. The room is set up, as I've mentioned, like an artist's workshop, much like one Da Vinci himself would have worked out of, though I imagine his were significantly larger. Da Vinci, like Sharp, was a multi-hyphenate, and some of his titles included teacher and scientist. And I would argue that Professor Sharp is a scientist, as much as one practicing magic can be a scientist, but studying the science of magic, I think there is a science to it. So perhaps they also share the title of artist. One last thing to mention about Da Vinci, because this is going to come up later, is that he had an obsession with birds and flight. Some of the things we find in this hidden room also point to a strong connection between Professor Sharp and Professor Fig, and these things may actually answer some questions and things I've brought up in previous videos, questioning the trust that there seems to be between Sharp and Fig. So, to begin, coming off of talking about Da Vinci, we also find one of these flying machines in Professor Fig's sitting room, as well as in his office. There are also two framed pictures on the mantle in Professor Fig's office that appear to depict his parents. They seem a bit older, but they do have striking similarities to Professor Fig. And these two portraits remind me a bit of those ceramic busts that are in the hidden room, potentially of Professor Sharp's parents, and honestly, finding these portraits in Professor Fig's office is what led me to further think that there is a parallel of showing parents here. I'm not sure there's much of a connection really to be drawn with this next detail I'm bringing up, but I thought it was very interesting. And that is that there are tortoise shells throughout Professor Fig's sitting room. There are 5 or 6 decorating the space, and appear similar to the bejeweled tortoise shell that we find directly outside of Professor Sharp's chambers. The Revelio page for that reads, "Jewel-encrusted tortoise shell. Many assume this to be the shell of a fire crab, native to Fiji. However, those in the know swear it's a bejeweled tortoise shell created by a mad wizard near Versailles. When his chateau was overrun by nifflers, the dazzling shell was carried off to be discovered years later by a Hogwarts professor on holiday in the Ardennes." These little details lead me to ask some questions. Was Fig Sharp's professor when Sharp was a student? Did he take Sharp under his wing, potentially after Sharp's parents died? Is this workshop actually Fig's, and Professor Sharp allows him to have access to it, and it's a bit of a secret between them, similar to Professor Fig letting Professor Sharp in on the secret of what actually happened to you at Gringotts pretty early on in the story of the game, after he's told you not to tell anyone. Never mentions that he's going to tell at least one person, that one person being Professor Sharp. These connections between them would explain, again, this trust there clearly is, as well as Professor Sharp being so quick to jump into battle along with you and Professor Fig. As I've mentioned previously, he is the only professor who fights alongside you in the game, other than Professor Fig. And if they do have this secretly close relationship, it would reflect the secretly close relationship of Dumbledore and Snape in the original Harry Potter series that we learn about later on in the series, and just how much they were working together behind closed doors. Circling back to the art in the room, there is a consistent theme in the art of flight symbolism. The paintings on the wall, aside from the Sphinx, are of flighted creatures. Half of the sketches in the room would appear to be from a bird's eye view. And of course, the flying machines, and again, this is why I brought up Da Vinci's obsession with birds in flight. Interestingly, there are also empty bird cages randomly hanging in the potions classroom. All of this bird and flight imagery led me to this interesting conclusion, which stems from my fan fiction, just being totally honest here. But there may be some things pointing to my headcanon being actual canon, cleverly hidden within the game. Allow me to explain. I believe Professor Sharp is an animagus, most likely unregistered, and his animal form is an owl, which would be very convenient because he could just deliver his own mail. My headcanon here, my reasoning for why Professor Sharp would have become an animagus, and again, I do think there are things here pointing to this possibly being true, is that he would have taken his chances becoming an animagus after his injury because he would most likely be a quadruped as an animal or a flighted creature. And of course, he could have become any slew of things, but having a couple extra legs to use when one of his is injured could come in handy, as well as if he had wings, would make it much easier to get around and effectively use his arms to traverse the world around him as opposed to his legs. And in a world where there are broomsticks you can fly on, magic carpets, why would becoming a flighted creature be important? And the reason for that, I believe, is that it allows some discretion. If you are flying on your broomstick or a magic carpet, someone even from a distance would be able to spot you, recognize you, and go, "Oh, there goes Professor Sharp flying by." But as an owl, he would just blend in with every other owl flying about the world, especially the wizarding world, delivering mail. He would also be able to discreetly get in and out of his chambers through that balcony in the hidden room. He could simply take flight from there, and someone would think it's an owl on its way to deliver some mail. And going back to how he became injured, how he left the ministry, he does appear to have a bit of shame about what happened to his partner and the part he played in that, and that he does feel responsible for it. So perhaps he doesn't feel he can freely travel about as himself. He feels people are looking at him. He even mentions at one point while you're talking to him that the students have rumors about him, that he does get stares, and again, as an animal, especially as an owl, you can simply take off and not be noticed, not be seen. Now, what in this room points to him being an owl? Firstly, let's actually talk about his sitting room, because there's some more flight imagery there. There are these two paintings, one of which I've found in one or two other locations in the game, but another that I cannot find anywhere, that depict flight. One, the one that I found in a few places, is of a group of witches and wizards on their broomsticks flying about. They almost appear to maybe be wearing Quidditch uniforms, but it's very blurry, hard to tell exactly. The other depicts a hippogriff with someone flying on it, it would appear, and some Dementors flying around the hippogriff. Perhaps this is simply a reference to Prisoner of Azkaban, but very interesting that we find these paintings in Professor Sharp's sitting room. In the hidden room, I mentioned there is straw on the floor, and another location where we find straw on the floor is the owlry. I have not been able to think of any other reason why this straw would be here, nor have I found any place other than the owlery that has straw on the floor like this. Perhaps one of the barns or sheds you go into in the hamlets, but otherwise, we see straw being associated with owls here. Straw is also symbolic of Professor Sharp's insulated, isolated world. It's used as a nesting material and can insulate an owl or any bird. So I do think there is some intentionality to the straw being on the floor. Again, I previously thought it was meant to show that the space was abandoned, but I'm thinking quite the opposite now. Another thing in the room, pointing to Professor Sharp being an owl animagus, going back to those painting wall murals, is the one of the owl. Perhaps this is him in his owl form. In the Wizarding world, in the Harry Potter universe, Animagi bear a physical mark similar to their human form in their animal form, so most likely Professor Sharp the owl would have a scar over his left eye, and maybe even a mangled leg. I also believe he would be unregistered because he wouldn't want anyone to know this secret, because he could also use it as protection for himself if he needs to hide, and if someone who is after him is aware that he is an owl animagus, they would just start going around killing any owl they see. In Hogwarts Legacy, you can actually learn about another ex-Auror who was an unregistered animagus. I didn't find this until looking at the Auror page on the Harry Potter wiki, but if you read Daily Prophet articles in the game, you learn the story of Patricia McManners, an ex-Auror who retired in 1875. That year has a connection to Professor Sharp. Go watch my deep dive to learn more about that. And she was discovered in the 1890 to 1891 school year. So already there is a precedent in Hogwarts Legacy of an ex-Auror who is an unregistered animagus. It would also seem, if you look at a list of known animagi throughout the Harry Potter franchise in the extended universe, it would seem a majority of animagi are unregistered, which would be even more reason for Sharp to take the risk of eventually ending up in Azkaban with people he sent there previously to, again, protect himself while going about the world. The stamp for the wax seal in that room could also show that he is writing letters up in that space and then delivering them himself. Another thing this could possibly explain, and another possible hint to him being an animagus, is the blood on the floor of his bedroom. By his desk in his bedroom, you'll see bloodstains on the floor. But perhaps this isn't blood, but is actually the animagus potion, which does turn blood red. He mentions that he came to Hogwarts to do research, and because of the access to research materials and the like that would help towards finding a cure for himself, that Hogwarts would have, that these are resources Hogwarts would have, and as potions master, he would also be able to discreetly and more easily gather the needed materials to create the animagus potion. And Professor Sharp, being an animagus, specifically an owl, brings us back to a different inspiration theory, and the most obvious one of the most obvious ones, which is the Greek fabulist Aesop. In Aesop's fables, there are a multitude of animals who are anthropomorphized and used in these stories to teach some sort of moral. And one animal that is the subject of some of these stories is an owl. For example, there is the story of the owl and the grasshopper, and the moral of this story is, do not let flattery throw you off your guard against an enemy. Perhaps this gives us a further hint of what led to his injury and the death of his partner. Maybe he miscalculated this moment because of some sort of flattery, trickery played upon him, I don't know.
However, success can make one complacent if one's confidence is not tempered by humility.
There's also the story of the owl and the birds, which again plays even more into what we're talking about here. And the moral of that story is that people should listen to those who are wise and have more experience and have proven themselves to know what they're talking about, even if they come across as a little crazy. And perhaps this is advice some of his students should heed. There are some that do. For example, Amit recognizes Professor Sharp's wisdom and mentions that he'd like to learn more, and especially to know more about his time as an Auror.
Professor Sharp must have learned a lot during his time as an Auror. I wish he talked about it more.
This could further create a connection to Professor Fig, particularly through the Aesop's Fable connection and the tortoise shells I mentioned earlier. Because another animal that is the subject of Aesop's fables and of the best known of Aesop's fables is the tortoise and the hare. I mentioned the tortoise and the hare in my deep dive. There is a line of Professor Sharp's that seems to connect to that story, interestingly enough.
After all, shortcuts only ever lead to shortcomings.
This also plays into the idea of Professor Fig possibly having taken Professor Sharp under his wing. Another bird flight symbolism there. Maybe Professor Fig was the only one who knew Professor Sharp's secret. Maybe he encouraged him to become an animagus and gave him the idea. Maybe Professor Fig is also an animagus and is a tortoise, and this is something they share. Even though we see times where Professor Sharp seems a bit iffy about Professor Fig and the way he teaches.
Professor Fig should keep a better eye on you.
They do seem to have some sort of friendship, some sort of closeness that we don't necessarily see between other professors in the game. Finally, Professor Sharp being an animagus would create a connection to the other very obvious inspiration for Professor Sharp, Severus Snape. It's never been confirmed, but for years fans have theorized that it is hinted in the books that Snape is an animagus and his animal form is a bat.
Bat?
So not only would these two potions masters both be animagi, they would also both be winged creatures. So I know that is quite a bit to digest. There is a lot presented here. Much of it may simply be coincidence. Honestly, even just the sketches in the room, I personally believe this is concept art that was cleverly included in the game. Though, interestingly, going through the art and making of Hogwarts Legacy, there are no sketches that match these, which doesn't mean they couldn't have simply put these in the game and not included them in the book. There is one that sort of matches, which is this sketch of the Sorting Hat. Do I believe that every single thing I've brought up pointing to Professor Sharp being an artist, being an animagus, having a deeper connection to Professor Fig are all intentionally there? No. But the quotes that I found in the art and making of Hogwarts Legacy does lead me to think that more of what I've brought up may be leading to something than not. But at the end of the day, it's simply fun to speculate and come up with fan theories. Like, I don't know, that another inspiration theory for Professor Sharp, going back to probably my craziest inspiration theory in my first video of Frollo, is that he is also partly based on Quasimodo from Disney's interpretation of the Hunchback of Notre Dame specifically. He's up in his tower making art and has a love of birds and flight with his winged gargoyle friends, but it's not like Sharp's up there ringing any bells, right? Oh my god. Editing Sarah here with a quick additional thought. You know who else likes bells a whole lot? Birds. There's a whole Bells for Birds section on the Chewy app. Your Honor, I rest my case. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. This was a really fun one. I was super excited to make this one. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had fun with this one. Let me know if you think there is something to any of the theories I've brought up here. If you believe Sharp is an animagus or not. Is he an artist, or is this simply a random room with concept art and just fun other things hidden? Who are those busts supposed to be? What does Professor Fig have to do with all of this? I don't know, so many questions, and I would love to know what you think, so let me know in the comments, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye! And the next one will not be a Sharp video, okay? I mean it this time. This wand, I used this in the intro to my first video, my Sharp deep dive. I never actually pointed out that this is a 3D printed version of Professor Sharp's wand. Because I'm that kind of crazy fangirl. By the way, I'm actually a Ravenclaw, but I'm a Slytherin fan. I'm like Luna when she's wearing the Gryffindor, her papier-mâché Gryffindor lion head. That's me, but I'd be wearing a snake.